Well, hello, listeners. The computer says we're live, so it's time to get started making this podcast. So let me bring up the right script, and away we go. I have it. I think I do. Okay. Hello, listeners. My name is Cliff Ratza. I'm the author of two ongoing series of novels, the Lightning Brain series and a sequel, the Keeper series. And in addition to being an author and a writing coach, I teach at universities and have a consulting business. If you would like to learn more about me, my books, my writing coach activities, please contact Prime Solutions via the lightningbrainseries.com website. Now, I try to make podcasts that I think authors and writers and most people would enjoy listening to. My latest string centers on the Ukrainian invasion, as does this one too. And I try to cover topics unlike what you might see on the news or in YouTube or other videos. I figured that if I can't find a different point of view, there's no reason for me to add something you can find elsewhere. Well, let me take a minute to explain my connection to the topic of this podcast. I would imagine that many of you have a great aunt like my great Aunt Mary. My great-grandparents on my father's side emigrated from Poland, Germany, and France and settled in Chicago. I can picture their faces when I see some of the video footage showing the poor Ukrainian families fleeing for safety. My great-aunt spoke Polish and took care of my great-grandparents, and she did all the cooking and cleaning and caring for my grandfather when he needed help. My parents did the same for her when she needed help, and when it was my turn, I moved back to Chicago, as well as my career, from the East Coast, and I became their caregivers. My aunt cooked or shopped for ethnic dishes, and she took me and my sister to holiday church services that served all sorts of ethnic foods from Eastern Europe. I never knew much about them other than their taste. So I thought I'd dig into these dishes now. And thus we come to the title of this podcast. Russia is losing the food fight in the Ukrainian war. And why do I say that Russia is losing the food fight? Well, here's what some news stories reported a day or so ago. McDonald's and Starbucks closed all their outlets in Russia. And Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Heineken halted sales. These and other American fast food giants and beverage companies have a lot on the line amid the escalating situation between Russia, Ukraine, and the rest of the world. And that's in large part because Western fast food players have expanded significantly into Russia with their burgers and fried chicken during the past 20 years. By Yahoo Finance's calculations, McDonald's, Papa John's, KFC, Pizza Hut, and Burger King, and Starbucks operate about 2,700 restaurants in Russia alone. The two largest players are McDonald's and Young Brands KFC, with a total of roughly 1,900 locations. McDonald's chief executive, Chris Kielbasa, said it was impossible to predict when it would reopen in Russia. McDonald's has also temporarily closed its 108 restaurants in the Ukraine. Europeans like American fast food almost as much as they like American theme parks. Perhaps because the American fast food companies are less restrictive than their European counterparts regarding regulating food and beverage ingredients. If any of you listeners have ever compared American to European fast foods, you might agree with many Europeans that the American menu items are tastier. Well, after hearing about this, I thought I would learn something about the Ukrainian people's attitude towards food. And thanks to the wealth and access of information on the internet, I soon found my fill. I'd like to read you a brief description, courtesy of the Maidan press, which is an online website. Let me first explain the word Maidan, spelled M-A-I-D-A-N. It's an Arabic word meaning square or open space, adopted by Ukrainians from the Ottoman Empire. During the protests in 2014, often called the Revolution of Dignity or the Maidan Revolution, the word Maidan acquired meaning of the public practice of speaking their mind about politics. The term Ukrainian Spring is sometimes used as well, echoing the Arab Spring. Now here's a summary of the Maidan protest movement. Ukraine's pro-European trajectory was abruptly halted in November of 2013 when a planned association agreement with the EU, that's the European Union, was scuttled just days before it was scheduled to be signed. The accord would have more closely integrated political and economic ties between the EU and the Ukraine. But Yanukovych bowed to intense pressure from Moscow. Street protests erupted in Kiev, and Lutsenko and Klitschko emerged as the leaders of the largest demonstration since the Orange Revolution. But police violently dispersed the crowds in Kiev's Maidan Nezalnosti, which is the name for their Independence Square. And as the protests continued into December, demonstrators occupied Kiev's city hall and called on Yanukovych to resign. Russia, in turn, offered to cut the price of natural gas and purchase $15 billion in Ukrainian bonds to prop up the country's faltering economy. Well, that's enough about political stuff. Let's get back to the Ukrainian people's attitude towards food. And I will read directly from the Euromaidan Press website. This comes from the Euromaidan Press. It's euromaidanpress.com. Food and culture are interwoven. The processes involved in preparing, serving, and sharing certain foods and drinks might appear simple, but they often carry important social and cultural significance. In most countries, recipes and dietary practices are used to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next. Traditional recipes are carefully passed down and can also be an expression of cultural identity. Sharing those recipes can be a source of pride and a simple way to celebrate one's cultural heritage with others. Ukraine has many regions, and each one has its own food products, recipes, and culinary habits. Ukrainian cuisine consists of age-old cooking traditions and practices closely associated with Ukrainian culture. Most food products are fried or boiled, stewed or baked. This is the most distinctive feature of Ukrainian cuisine. Ukrainian dishes are known for their variety, aroma, and specific taste. Especially tasty and healthy are meat and vegetable dishes, cabbage rolls, Volyn-styled krushenki, etc., etc. Ukrainian cuisine includes hundreds of interesting recipes, borscht and pompushkai, flat cakes and dumplings, mushroom sauces, banash, different types of varinki and sausages, fruit and honey beverages. Some dishes are centuries old, such as Ukrainian borscht. I thought it was a pretty good introduction, so what I did next was surf to find out about the most popular Ukrainian foods. Here's a sample of what I found. Kielbasa. It's a type of meat sausage from Poland, and very common in the Ukraine. Then there's varenki, also known as pierogi. They are boiled dumplings stuffed with potato, cheese, or other filling. And there's borscht, which is cabbage or beet soup. Then there's potato pancakes, durovny, and cheese crepes. Those are dalsinka. And there's also a Ukrainian version of apple pie. I watched a culinary artist make and bake one. It had more apples and cinnamon and a thicker crust than what we make in America. It looked really tasty. I also learned that Eastern Europeans like pork. Pork and buckwheat is a favorite. Do you know what buckwheat is? I've heard of buckwheat pancakes, but I never knew what buckwheat is until I checked it out in preparation for this podcast. Buckwheat is a common buckwheat is a plant cultivated for its grain-like seeds, and it's also a cover crop. Despite its name, buckwheat is not closely related to wheat. And the most mouth-watering Ukrainian dish I came upon is braised pork and creamy mashed potatoes served in a creamy mushroom sauce containing diced and sautéed mushrooms, carrots and onions, and garlic cloves, seasoned with coriander, cumin, paprika, and black pepper, prepared in a braising liquid containing vegetable broth, sour cream, catsup, and salt. Watching a chef prepare it made me hungry, and it also made me thirsty. So I searched for information about Ukrainian beverages and came up with a list containing vodka, slivovitz, samajan, starka, brandy like chacha, and ogi, horilka, and so on. But I thought I could do better by surfing further, and I did. I found a travel info blogging site called Milioni, run by an enterprising fellow named Andre. Here's how he described himself. I'm Andre, originally from Brazil. My purpose is to help others discover different places, cultures, and perspectives. Proud Westerner, anti-communist, and politically incorrect. My professional ambition is to create new value propositions for a travel and tourism industry. I like this fellow. And here's what he says about his website. The name Milioni comes from Marco Polo's book, Il Milioni, through which he tells his adventures while traveling from Europe towards Asia. Inspired by Polo's stories, and from my ambition to contribute to the travel industry, I've started this blog sharing travel tips, considering different segments of budgets and travelers. Money is not an excuse for not enjoying the best experiences around the world. So when I returned to Brazil at the end of 2013, while processing many travel experiences and culture shocks, ideas and inspirations were blooming in my mind after living in India, Egypt, Serbia, and backpacking around Central and Eastern Europe. So that's the genesis of his website. I like his entrepreneurial and a can-do spirit. And here are more details in his very own words about Ukrainian beverages and spirits. What are the typical Ukrainian drinks? I assume that vodka is the first thing that comes to your mind, but it is just a general stereotype when it comes to drinks in Eastern Europe. In this post, I list the alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks most consumed by Ukrainians, which drinks you will find in restaurants, bars, and supermarkets, and local stores. Of course, I tasted them all while living in the country as an exchange student. As in all Eastern Europe, alcohol consumption is present in Ukrainian culture. Offering alcohol to guests is even a matter of education, and refusing is interpreted as an offense. Alcoholism is a serious problem in Eastern Europe, especially in the countryside where unemployment rates are high, but far from what I've seen in the Nordic countries. the Ukrainian population does not look at alcoholism favorably. But in all the time I was in the country, the ones I saw messing up with alcohol were usually students from the Middle East who saw themselves with easy access to alcoholic drinks and freedom they're not used to having. Ukrainians tend to be hard drinkers, like Russians, Poles, Serbs, Romanians, and all the people in the region. The trick is to accompany the shots with salty and greasy food, like salo, and a few sips of water, respecting your alcoholic tolerance. So let's get to the point and say cheers in Ukrainian. Budmo. Alcoholic drinks from Ukraine. Well, drinking pure vodka has always been understood as something indecent in the Ukraine, so to speak. Then, most typical Ukrainian alcoholic beverages combine vodka with spices, herbs, fruits, and grains. As seen in the case of drinks Nalivka, Vanunka, Spachkach, and Medivha. Vodka in Ukraine is called gorilka. And you can't talk about drinks in the Ukraine without mentioning vodka. And I just done that. Now to some of the actual specific beverages. Korsvetsa. In the university city of Kharkiv, there is the Ukrainian Vodka Museum. I never knew that. Well, I haven't been there. That's me speaking. That's me, Cliff, the simple scholar. Back to the beverages. Nalivka is also called nastoyanka, a liquor made from fruit or grains, usually homemade, in a mixture of vodka, honey, sugar, and fruit in a barrel. There is a list of dozens of different names for nyalkva in the Ukrainian language, as well as flavors according to the fruit used in preparation. And there's baranuka. Baranuka is a drink made from vodka or liquor with the addition of cinnamon, dried fruits, honey, and other ingredients according to the preference of those who prepare it. Basically, it is a combination of vodka with spices mixed in a pan, cooking between 10 and 12 hours over low heat. Then there's spadakach. It's a drink made from vodka combined with spices such as cloves, cinnamon, saffron, among other ingredients, which are processed for 2 weeks before being filtered and boiled. It is considered a dessert drink. It is sweet and aromatic, which is usually consumed in shots. Then there's Medivha. Medivha is a honey-based liquor added to yeast and water and other ingredients according to the preferences of those who prepare it. It is not as alcoholic as vodka. The content of Medivha is usually around 20% or less alcohol. This drink is typical of the Christmas season, which in Ukraine is in January, according to the Orthodox Christian calendar. What about Ukrainian beers? The beer culture in Ukraine is much bigger than any stereotype you might think, and craft beers have expanded across the country. In addition to the influence of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that are visible especially in western Ukraine, in the region where the city of Lviv is located. Ukrainian beers that every traveler should try include Chernyhevsky, Obolan, Levitsky, and you can find them in all establishments in the country. And now to non-alcoholic beverages served in the Ukraine. Well, Ukrainians do not live only in alcoholic drinks as stereotypes suggest. So, we go with a list of the most consumed non-alcoholic drinks in the Ukraine: kvass, uzvar, kompot, and kaisel. They are also popular in other Eastern European countries. Kvass is a drink made from fermented bread, also popular in Russia, Belarus, and other countries of the former USSR. Then there's uzvar. Uzvar is a non-alcoholic drink made from dried fruits and grains thrown in hot water, but without boiling. It is usually consumed after it is cooled down with the addition of honey. Then there's kompot. It's made from fresh or dried fruits such as pear, apple, apricot, among others, with the addition of honey according to the tastes of those who prepare it. It can be served cold or hot. Then there's kaisel. Kaisel is a non-alcoholic drink made from fruit with starch or gelatin. In fact, it somewhat remembers the Tang juice. I remember Tang as a kid. It was the drink for spacemen and people. There's an orange powder that you would mix. Okay, back to what Andre says. Kaisel, the mixture is usually boiled. It is one of the drinks most consumed by children in the Ukraine, and a part of the Ukrainians I know describe it as my childhood drink. What do I remember drinking as a kid? How about Ovaltine? And Bosco? Wasn't Bosco a chocolate syrup? Anyway. Andre had more to say, but that's enough for this podcast. And I learned something I bet all of you already know. Researching on the internet any travel destinations you have will certainly help you navigate the features and foods wherever you go. And if you ever visit the Ukraine, why not visit online the Euromaidan and Million websites first? And I will follow Andre's advice, wishing you cheers in Ukrainian. Budmo! Okay. It is time to end this podcast. And I recorded this while being sober, as I usually am, because my drink of choice is Coca-Cola. So, Budmo, everyone. Budmo.